Alrighty, so we're going to get started. Thank you everybody for joining us this morning. We have a full day of talks and breakouts. And let me turn this down a little bit. So my name is Jeff Chen. I'm the director of the UCLA Cannabis Research Initiative, and I'm proud that this is our second annual Interdisciplinary UCLA Cannabis Research Symposium. It's a mouthful. And we're at a very exciting time in history. Right, January 2nd, 2018, the state of California commenced the adult use sale of cannabis. And overnight, we became the largest population out of any state or country in the world with access to legal, regulated cannabis. I cannot understate the social experiment that we have embarked on with that. And here in Los Angeles, we have a unique opportunity as well. And that's because the LA market is the single largest cannabis market in the world, and it's likely to remain that way for the foreseeable future. And what do I mean by that? Well, prior to the start of adult use sales, medical cannabis sales in the LA market exceeded all of adult use sales in the state of Colorado. All right, so that's the scale that we're looking at. Moreover, we're hosting the Olympics in about a decade, and we'll be the first city in the world to host an Olympics with legal, regulated cannabis. Right, so talk about people from around the world coming and kind of observing the results of this grand experiment that we've embarked on. Then lastly, because LA is such a large market, you have cannabis companies that are now locating their headquarters and operations here and really making LA the nexus of the worldwide cannabis industry. And so from the standpoint of studying how does this impact society, we're in a very unique position at a very unique time in history. And so today I'm really excited that we have this morning of interdisciplinary talks. We'll be hearing about everything from the historical uses of medical cannabis to using social media to track legalization outcomes to learning about the endocannabinoid system, right? These natural cannabis-like molecules that our bodies make. And then in the afternoon, there's various breakouts and topics that you might be interested in to focus in on so that UCLA can develop work around these important priority areas. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker. It's Dr. Alain Touwaide. He's a professor in the history of medicine, and he's the scientific director of the Institute for the Preservation of Medical Traditions. And today he'll be talking about cannabis consumption in antiquity. So join me in a warm round of applause for Dr. Touwaide.
So good morning, everybody. And
why is the screen
thank you. Yes, we have just a part of the slide. Thank you for having me here. As our host said, I'm not part of the cannabis tribe. I come from the history tribe, and I work specifically on the history of medicinal plants in the culture of the Mediterranean. And I've been fortunate to teach these kind of things here on campus in order to bring together North and South campus. As you know, these are two completely different worlds. And I was requested to build a bridge between these two worlds. And it's really interesting because my students are coming more from the medical campus than from the humanities. And so I hope that this is just a sign of the work we can do together. We don't want to have the slides correctly. I hope that my teaching activity and my student population is a good sign of the possibilities of collaboration between the humanities and the rest of the world, the other people. So what I would like to do today, when we have our slides, is going through some of the ancient documentation I work on, which is about the Mediterranean, the Greek, Latin, and Arabic material, and more than anything else, why there is some sort of culture of denial of the use of cannabis and other psychoactive substances. And so it will be both informative paper about what we know and a reflection paper about why we don't know that much at the end of the day. And you'll see that this might be something interesting, concepts which are still alive in our society, and we'll go to the roots of these concepts and these problems. But we need to have good slides before we can do that. And so, in the meantime, I can also I can say you 2 words. I can say you 2 words about the Institute for the Preservation of Medical Traditions. Because, as I have mentioned, I come from the world of history, of classics. I read ancient Greek, Latin, and Arabic as you read English. And I have been doing my research ever since on medicinal plants. And so I was always working in a context which is not the context of humanities. And I just spent 15 years at the Smithsonian in the Natural History Museum, Botany Department, and I was always some sort of in the between, never pertaining totally to the place where I was working. And so after several years of this very uncomfortable situation, we decided that it was high time to create a space specifically designed to do this kind of interdisciplinary research. And this is the Institute for the Preservation of Medical Traditions, which is a legal entity duly registered here in the US, non-profit, and believe me, we don't make profit. And we have a collection of documentation about all the topics we work on. Okay, looks like we might have it. But this is some sort of patch. Okay. So, we are ready to go? Yeah, okay. We'll go that way? Okay, so I'll finish what I'm saying about the Institute and then we'll go. We have a personal collection of 23,000 books on all the topics we work on, and this collection right now is hosted at the Huntington in San Marino. Technically, it's 19 miles from here. Practically, if you go by car, it's 1 hour and a half if you are lucky. So let's be serious. And this collection is open to the scientific and scholarly community, even though it's our personal collection. The Huntington has been nice enough to give us a large space and to make it possible to have this collection open to the scientific and scholarly community. So this was some sort of introduction, and not to be here doing nothing while we are trying to get the computer okay. So, as I've said, what I want to do is going through some of the ancient documentation and more than anything else, trying to see if we can trace the source, the roots of what we could call the dark ages of cannabis and psychoactive substances. Should work, okay. So here, we will talk thus about cannabis, and right now, because of the problem which has been created by the legalization of cannabis, it is really trendy, even in the historical and archaeological sciences. And so you see here this kind of paper which has been recently published, and you have this very attractive title, Did the Gaulois, the ancestors of the Frenchies, drink wine with cannabis? Very interesting, of course. And so, the first point is the native distribution. Where is cannabis from? And you'll see here that in this book published in 1998, there is some sort of general agreement to locate the origin of cannabis in a space between the Caspian Sea, central and southern Russia, the Himalaya. But archaeological research very recently reopened this debate, and on the basis of archaeological traces, it seems that the native origin might be larger than what we were thinking until very recently. And so here you have also this paper about the first populations which might have dispersed cannabis all over the old world. But while we assume that cannabis was typical of the old world, it might have been present at the same time in the new world. And you have in this book a collection of testimonia, of documents, of archaeological traces, representations of plants, which might indicate that we should get out of this traditional thinking, distribution, old world, new world, either one of the two, but not the two together. So this is a question which has been reopened. Returning to the Mediterranean, we'll take a look at some documentation. We have images of cannabis in ancient texts, and even though the quality of these images is not necessarily what we would like them to be, we have always at least some element to recognize without any doubt that there is some species of cannabis. And so you have here different manuscripts from the 7th century on the left to the 13th on the right. The three on the left are Greek, the one on the right is Latin. This to mean that there is a continuity in the tradition of the information about cannabis. And I'll take one of the most important texts of Antiquity about medicinal plants, and not only plants, all natural resources that were used as ingredients to prepare medicine, so including plants, of course, but also minerals and animals. The treatise by Dioscorides, a Greek. We don't know whether he was a physician, a pharmacist, a druggist, a chemist. We don't know exactly what he was, but basically we have from him a huge encyclopedia, which is traditionally identified as De Materia Medica, which we can translate properly on the natural substances that were used as ingredients to prepare medicine. And here is what we find in the treatise. I have translated directly from the Greek, and I have tried to give a faithful translation which reflects the text itself. It is a useful plant in daily life for braiding very strong ropes. Its leaves are similar to those of the ash, and I have included here the binomial Linnean designation of the ash, smelling full, with long stems, hollow, and a round fruit, edible, which when eaten too much, extinguishes sperm. And so here, I know that in English it doesn't work really well, extinguish sperm, but I've tried to reflect the Greek word. The juice obtained from green plants is appropriate against ear aches when instilled. That's all we have in Dioscorides. We know for sure that cannabis was present in ancient culture, but that's all we have. In Galen, the famous physician Galen, and you have his date, 129 and possibly sometimes after 216, in the treatise on the properties of foodstuff, chapter 34, you have a short paragraph again, but here we have already a small difference. It's not about cannabis, the Greek word cannabis, but about Indicos cannabis. It resembles the Charles tree, Vitex castus, which you know, and you have it on the picture. Its seed is difficult to assimilate. It produces headache and unhealthy humors. So we are here in what is called the humoral physiological system. Basically, the human body works thanks to 4 humors: blood, phlegm, which is corrupted matter within the body. It can be pus, it can be whatever generates an infection, yellow bile, and black bile. So we know here that according to Galen, cannabis indicos generates unhealthy humors and unhealthy matters within the body. Nevertheless, some people roast and eat it with sweetmeats, so like some sort of sweet sesame or something like that. Its seeds are pretty warming. That's very important. And consequently, when they are taken in quantity over a short period, they affect the head. So what is warming in ancient philosophy is light and goes up, moves up. Here, in our case, to the head. Sending up to it a vapor that is both warm and like a drug. So we have some sign here about possibly what can be understood as a psychoactive effect. It is translated into the physics of vapor. It is light, it goes up in the head, and you could translate, understand, paraphrase that the text means it sends clouds to your head. That's what the text says in a certain way. And then the subsequent literature repeats quite truthfully the information of either Dioscorides or Galen or both together. We don't have any new information relevant and original before the 11th century in a text by a certain Simeon Seth and a small treatise on the properties of foodstuff. And this text is extremely interesting because it assimilates material from Arabic. We know about the circulation of information in the Mediterranean from Greece to Rome, from Rome to Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire, and then translation from Greek, from the Byzantine Empire into Syriac, and then from Syriac into Arabic, 9th century, the Arabic Empire. But we don't know that much about translation from Arabic into Greek. Nevertheless, this is something which existed and which was really important, particularly in the 14th century. But here we are in the 11th century. And Simeon Seth is somebody who was originally from Antioch, so now in Syria, in the corner of the Mediterranean between Turkey, Lebanon, Syria, Antioch. And he translated also a narrative from Arabic. So he probably was a bilingual person who was in contact with the two worlds, and at this point he was transmitting the information from one world to another, and he went to Constantinople. So he was at the center of the empire. And so what we have in the treatise here about cannabis eaten, the seed of cannabis provokes the same damage, in Greek, vlavi, which is really a damage. The same damage as coriander. And you'll wonder, coriander, that's not a psychotropic substance. It might be. In the phytotherapy literature and in the ancient Greek text, coriander is indeed considered to be a psychotropic substance, but it might also be the case that there might be contamination with other agents which might have provoked this kind of psychotropic effect. Taken without measure, indeed, it provokes madness. And the word in Greek is really madness, as the latter as coriander. The dry leaves provoke some sort of drunkenness, and again, the word in Greek is really drunkenness and a loss of consciousness among Arabs. So here, Simeon Seth cites his sources. It is taken instead of wine, and they get drunk. It dries sperm as camphor. So we have the same concept as we had in the Greek text. And then after that, we don't have much more information. Here we have a problem again with the computer, because I see that there is a part of the name of Ibn al-Baitar which traveled on the slide. In the Greek world, we don't have new information, and as Simeon Seth made it clear, we have to go into the Arabic world to find new information. And we have here Ibn al-Baitar al-Malaki, and I had written the name in Arabic, and so there is a part of the name which traveled on the slide. You have the dates here of Ibn al-Baitar. He's a very interesting personage because he was born in Malaga, al-Malaki in Arabic, and he traveled all across the Mediterranean, arriving in Baghdad and collecting not only plants but also information about the uses of the plants. And he compiled a huge encyclopedia which can be considered the Arabic equivalent of what Dioscorides was in Greek. So we have really two important encyclopedias here over 1,000 years. And in Ibn al-Baitar, we find this. There is another species of hemp, which is called Arcunacal indi, which is Indian. I have seen it only in Egypt. This is important because it will return in our story. Where it is cultivated, it violently, there is again something that goes wrong with my slide, the Arabic. The computer doesn't like Arabic. it is in a garden, so it is also called, that's, I see the problem, that the Arabic word that has traveled from it is also called. And the Arabic word cancelled to another word. And the word in Arabic is asha'ish, ashish, of course. It intoxicates those who take even a small quantity, that is 1 or 2 drugs, which is a very small quantity. At such a point that prolonged consumption provokes mindlessness. There are people who use it, their mind is altered, and they end up crazy, sometimes even dying. So this is the first, most complete information we have about the effects. In Greek culture, we have something, but in a completely different field, not in medicine. We all know these texts by Herodotus, the father of history, who attributes the use of cannabis to the Scythians. And so here we have this text, which is very well known in the literature. You can find it in many publications there, which is the Scythians. Put a dish with red hot stones in it. They then take some hemp seed, throw the seed onto the hot stones. At once it begins to smoke, giving off a vapor. Delighted, they shout for joy. And Herodotus goes on describing the life and rights of the Scythians. Hemp grows in Scythia. It is very like flax, only that it is much coarser and taller plant. Some grows wild about the country, some is produced by cultivation. Interesting information here that we don't have in the scientific literature. And here again, you have the description of some of the uses of hemp. The vapor serve them instead of a water bath, for they never by any chance wash their bodies with water, which is completely different to what the Greeks did. Water in Greece is something significant. Their women make a mixture of cypress, cedar, and frankincense wood, which they pound into a paste. With this substance, they plaster their faces and their whole bodies. For Herodotus and for the Greek, this is strange. And that's exactly the point. Because the question here is not hemp, but the Scythians, and the opposition to what the Greeks did. So the Scythians are a population located, as you see here, on the shore of the Black Sea and a little bit more inland. And you see here this painting, 19th century, which represents the general concept of the Scythians. Scythians are barbars. That's the idea of the Greeks about the Scythian. They are the opposite of the Greeks, while instead they were a very developed civilization with full art, and you see here, for example, the kind of jewels that they produced in gold. The concept is that they were at the edge of the inhabited world of the Greeks. And so here on the map, I've circled Greece in red. Greece is the center of the world, and you have two extremities, north